the people around you should make you happy, but they don't make you, right? They're not going to give you purpose. You have to be you. That's your job, to be you.
You're listening to the Science and Spirit of Happy podcast, where we discuss the rational, strategic, and psychological methods, but also the deep reasons and spiritual philosophy behind being happy down to the soul. Happiness isn't just hedonism. It's not even solely personal. Getting happy dramatically increases your effectiveness in every area, from business and finance to relationships. When we align with our own personal version of ideal, we end up not just happier, but healthier, more whole, more successful and richer, but even loving and loved. It's my opinion that getting happy for yourself is the absolute best way to serve the people in your life. I'm your host, Laura Lee Bowers, master healer and academic researcher. And this is another episode diving into
The science and spirit of happy.
the logical path to soul.
G'day, y'all. Welcome back. We're talking about relationships this season. And in this particular episode, we're talking about space, which is a very interesting topic for me personally, from my experience, what I'm experiencing now in my relationship versus like where I come from and who I've been. Because my background and even my character, I think, is like hyper independent. So like I've traveled around the world on my own. When my partner actually came to meet me, I was living on my own in Asia. I was drawn to academia because of the joy and the fulfillment I get from being in my own internal space, chasing the knowledge and the wisdom that I desire to seek. This lifestyle of studying and writing and reading and then conversing, that's a very small part of academic work is actually talking about your work. The largest amount of your work when you're going to school or you're teaching or researching, etc., is the research, is the actual spending the time with your own thoughts. So this is who I am, right? I am somebody who really enjoys their internal world, who really enjoys thinking, who really enjoys reflecting and writing and reading and thinking and just pondering and processing, And I'm also someone who is in a relationship where we spent pretty much 24/7 together for the first, 5 years. Now, as I mentioned before, we have a child, which means we actually have to separate way more than we essentially ever have. We've spent 2 nights apart in our entire relationship. So we spend so much time together. I can't really say that I've been judged too often in a negative way, but I know like people have mentioned when I talk about my husband and I having issues that they think that we spend too much time together. And I do know that most relationships are not like this. And I've heard like multiple times people are shocked that it's not a problem that we spend so much time together, because people like are pretty explicit that they would, kill their significant other or whatever, that they would become quite annoyed with their significant other if they're around them as much as I am around mine. So I really want to talk about space and what space is, and whether or not relationships require space, and if so, when they require space, and how that space is ideally presented, and what makes you need space and why. But I want to preface this with saying that hyper-individualism, so I'm not talking about being the kind of person who has a character who really enjoys their internal world and therefore is pretty independent. I'm talking about hyper-individualism, like all I need is myself, like every man is an island kind of philosophy. This is very much a modern idea in modern society. So we'll discuss a little bit about, whether or not that's correct or not, whether or not that's, the way, like what about that is correct, what about that is not so. But first, in response to this hyper individualistic way of seeing society, which gives us incredible things like human rights, like each person matters, is kind of juxtaposed by this innate tendency of the human species to live communally, to live in communities, right? We're pack animals. I've said, a few times in the podcast, in previous episodes, that we're the most social species on the planet, right? So inherently, we must take for granted that we're not made to be alone. We're not made to be alone, right? We're not made to be alone. People who experience social isolation are more prone to disease and dementia. They die earlier. They have a lower quality of life overall. Absolutely. And meaningful relationships are associated with all signs of health and well-being and achievement as well. So we're made to live in groups, right? Look at cities. I mean, even towns. We're designed, right? Human beings are designed to live in groups. But we're also advanced beyond, tribal living, right? And that's a good thing. Give me penicillin any day. I am a modern loving person. I see the world as being in constant state of progress, right? I would never want to give up my own home to live communally. I wouldn't even want to live communally in my own home. I don't think really communally, like having everything in the commons. That's just that's not who I am. And I don't think that that's who we are either as a species, as a human, family. I like to think of relationships, or I like to think of my life in the analogy of a house, right? So this visual, this illustration of there's a house, and there's my kitchen table, and there's my bedroom, and then there's the porch, and then there's my yard, and then there's a fence, and then there's the sidewalk and the road and the other side of the street, and halfway across the city, as kind of my realms of intimacy. Right. So when you're getting to know somebody, you're kind of getting to know where they're going to fit in your realm of intimacy. Some people, I'm okay, stay at the gate, right? You can stand at the gate, and I'll wave from my yard, hi, and have that kind of separation. Or, some people, it's all the way on the porch or into my living room, into my kitchen, at my kitchen table, where we can have some tea and bickies or something. And when it's, romantic partner or, your family members, it's like up in my room, right? In the bedrooms, upstairs, in the house, at the center of it. So when we're talking about, space and what level of space relationships need, we're usually talking about romantic relationships, but because this whole season is about also friendships too, I wanted to kind of like illustrate that, there'll be different levels of like space required for the different levels of intimacy, right? So I'm talking mostly about romantic partnerships because that's kind of where I think you need space protocol or prescription, the prescriptive space that we're supposed to need in those kinds of relationships, I think is really poorly defined and outright probably wrong in the way that it's being discussed these days and understood. But, in friendships and stuff, it can be healthy to like not want to be with somebody every day, all day long. I think it's also really, really healthy that you would also have those friends in your life that you can spend every day with, that you would have, up in your bedroom, taking care of your children, like there's layers for everybody in your life. And some friends can be like family. And that's where the idea of boundaries kind of overlaps with the idea of space. I believe in interdependence, and interdependence requires independence, right? So I'm not talking about codependence. I'm talking about interdependence. And I think that there's probably not a lot of argument for, humans being made to live any other way. So what is healthy for human relationships? What's healthy for human relationships is bringing the you to the relationship. It's bringing the you to you and me. It's bringing the you to the community. It's bringing your gifts of what you're here to bring, your purpose, living that in tandem with other people, like in commune, in connection, right? But there has to be a you. So this idea of space, I mean, in one sense, it makes a lot of rational. It's logical, right? The idea of space that I hear, though, I talked about this, how I was so shocked being in a close, loving relationship, how wrong all of the messaging I got about relationships really was. And this idea of space seems to be one that keeps coming at me, or, I mean, not directly at me, but it keeps popping up that I hear so often in our discussions about specifically relationships that actually means misalignment more than what I would consider healthy space. So the idea of space that I keep hearing, and the idea of space society keeps, or our social kind of culture right now keeps sort of harping on, I feel like actually means misalignment more than healthy space. So having to be separate to get along, like that means you're not jiving, right? Like obviously, bear with me, okay? I'm going to go through this. Like if it's in progress, that's good. If you are like having to take space, it's kind of like being, out of sync with someone, or you're not harmonizing, right? And if you play music, or you've ever heard, somebody singing out of key, or, two instruments that aren't tuned to the same tuning, trying to play together, or instruments playing in opposite keys that aren't like, that don't harmonize together. It's absolutely awful. I used to have somebody living downstairs from me in this house that would play piano and was absolutely wretched at keeping time. And it would drive me nuts. I would have to leave the house because it would make me feel like I was like I was, it feels like you're being forced to vibrate to like a frequency that just makes you want to explode, right? And so of course, like if your energy, right? Your beingness, your feelings, the things that you want, if you are out of step with the person that's in the same room as you, if you are not harmonizing, it's going to be very difficult to stay there, right? If you're out of time with one another, it can feel like their timing is like beating you over the head, right? And having to separate is a product of that. So if this is in progress, right? You're learning how to harmonize. You're learning how to keep in step with one another, and you need to take a moment to come back, in a different key, of a different tone, a different approach, dancing to, a different beat. Then this is really helpful and beneficial. But if this is a contingency of being able to be together, that you need to like leave and then come back so that you can handle, the disharmony, or the disharmony is not being addressed and how you're coping is with space. This is a mismatch, right? Okay. So what is healthy space? Because I explained that our relationships, like interdependence is the way to be. Interdependence is you in a healthy community. Interdependence is you in a connected, thriving family. Okay. Each person doing their job. So independence necessarily means that you're taking up space, right? That you're your own person. And that's what the truth is behind that, this messaging that relationships require space. Space is taking up your own space. So the space that relationships require is being yourself. That can come while you're in the same room with your partner, with your friends, with your family. You could all be making dinner together. You can go chop some onions while somebody is, a couple steps down the island, cutting up some peppers or something. That's space. You doing your little job, them doing their little job, even having a comment here or there, or listening to some music together. That's still taking up space. You could read a book in the same room as, yourself or a bunch of people. I mean, I myself, I love to go to a cafe and do some work or read a book or do some journaling. Well, that's space, right? That's me taking up space in the same space as other people. That's the kind of space that really makes interdependence, makes a relationship, right? When you think about, your ideal relationship, or when you think about, people who are married for a long time and have, a bunch of kids, or are super happy, or don't have kids and are super happy long term, like, what do you think? Do you think of two people separate, doing their separate things, like being separate people, living separate lives, and then coming together every once in a while and saying, hey? Like, no, that's not the way that most people would see that. If you are, maybe it's because of experiences that you've had that, you're kind of like protecting yourself and seeking kind of disconnection for safety. the way that we see, that happy partnership, that marriage, that family, like it's togetherness, right? The overwhelming kind of vibe is like togetherness, right? And like there's all different kinds of ways to be a good partner, to be a good parent, to be a good friend. We know that, codependence is like, it's detrimental to relationships. We also know that, being like a helicopter parent is not, developmentally appropriate to foster, children's learning. I actually was looking online. I wanted to know about people, like couples, romantic couples who sleep in separate rooms, whether there's any research that says like this is bad or this is good. And there isn't. I think it kind of comes down to if there's sleep problems, sleeping together, then it's actually really beneficial for the relationship to sleep in separate rooms so that you're both getting sleep. I mean, this is your life partner. Hopefully you don't want to be having crappy sleep for the rest of your life. Anybody who's had a newborn knows that for sure. So there's nothing wrong with the way that you choose to healthily set up your life. There's nothing inherently wrong with, whatever, sleeping in different rooms. It's just a different kind of relationship. So the bottom line is kind of to say that like space is healthy, or to say that togetherness, like being together all the time, is not good for you, or that space is unhealthy. Like none of these things, you can't say these things outright. You can't claim that space is healthy. Okay. Like you taking up your space is definitely healthy. If somebody doesn't allow you to have, space to exist in the relationship, if you're not seen, if you're not heard, if you're not allowed to be yourself, like that's unhealthy. It's not the space. Or the same is to say that like, being together all the time isn't healthy. That's completely bogus. That's not a thing. We're actually made to be together all the time. But one thing I know for sure is that giving space for people to be themselves and getting space to be yourself, this is crucial for forming love relationships. So a couple of episodes back, I talked about, heartbreak and falling in love and what it takes to fall in love, and giving someone space, just holding space for someone to just be. This is what landed me in a super loving relationship after not, being able to and this came directly from me being able to create space for myself first. And I go through that in the episode 2 of the season 2 in the heartbreak and love. But when we hear these adages, like absence makes the heart grow fonder, I mean, that's for dating. That's when you're not sure about something and you need reflection on it, right? Independently. Like if you need reflection on the people in your life that you're choosing to be around, and you need to do so independently in order for you to feel loving towards them, that's not committed love, okay? That's you making up your mind. And sure, if you take a bit of time or whatever to do whatever. Sometimes like I take some time and then I miss my baby, and I go and I see him. I'm like, oh, I missed you so much. But this isn't really absence, right? Like when we hear this, that absence makes the heart grow fonder. That's not true. Familiarity makes the heart grow fonder. I actually really, really started to think this early on, that the more time you spend with people, the more that love develops directly from familiarity. And when I had my son, I realized how true this was, that, my son was here, and the longer that we spent with him, the more he began to love us. Because when they come out, they're just like, what? But the longer that you spend together, you foster this love and love and love and love. Familiarity breeds love. And we hear the opposite is true, that familiarity breeds contempt. Well, no, familiarity breeds understanding where you're not harmonizing with people. And in our society, when we're taught this hyper independent, whatever, so many people are suffering from micro trauma and they're living in their ego tool, which I discuss in the Zero to Hero course at length on how to bring yourself back from living in the ego tool. Yeah, familiarity does breed contempt because like we're not finding ways to harmonize if we're only thinking about ourselves, if, we're judging and we're defensive and we're summing things up in vain, shallow ways. Of course, we're not going to, familiarity isn't going to foster loving relationships. But when you're allowed to be yourself, when you're just coexisting with other people, and especially if you're living in an interdependent way, you're absolutely going to build a bond over time. I mean, what is family anyhow? Coming from a background where I didn't have, a family that I felt was incredibly loving or connected. I really have yearned for family. And so I've looked at it a lot and studied it a lot because I wanted it so much. And I had to understand it in order to get it because I didn't understand it. And we've normalized this idea that teens, just hate their parents and kids are embarrassed by them. That's not normal. That's parents not seeing their kids. That's parents not giving them space within the relationship to be who they are. When teens are out and they're starting to develop their independence, etc., they're starting to know who they are. They're starting to really care about their friend groups and stuff and look to them for community. If we don't give them space as parents to do that and accept that that's where they're at, then of course they're going to have resentment. We're not giving them space to be themselves. A happy, healthy family, they stick together. Mom and dad are a unit. The brothers and sisters are your constant companions. And I'm not saying that you can't have a healthy, happy family that is, has a different dynamic. But when we think about, the traditional nuclear family, we think about togetherness. Right? And there are so many families that actually do that. And the families that do, the parents allow the kids to have space and the kids are raised that way. And therefore they turn around and give the parents space. The best advice I ever got, I had a friend of mine who just had an absolutely wonderful family. I've had a couple friends of mine that had absolutely wonderful families and big families. And one of them I asked, how do you get along? Because she was still living with her family well into her 20s and even 30s. And they were so close, all of them. And she said, well, they're just people, and it was just so plain and simple that the family members just treated each other like they were just people, right? So it isn't like this blood connection or whatever, this gene, togetherness. It's just allowing people to be people. That's what a healthy family really consists of. So even if you're in a situation where, you have separate homes or whatever, that part doesn't really matter. It's the ability to maintain interdependence, to maintain the connection with one another while you have whatever space that you need. And, if you are in a separate household scenario, that obviously space couldn't heal that relationship, right? Space couldn't make the relationship work. The reason you needed to separate, the reason you needed the big space was because it wasn't jiving, because it was out of harmony. And that could be because you're not able to be yourself, or just because you yourself didn't vibe with who, your partner was themselves. So if you're unable to be yourself, and your partner makes you unhappy, then that's bad, okay? That's a bad relationship. This is not good. This is not functional. This is not productive. If you're coping with space, that's not aligned. Okay. That's not aligned with you. It's not aligned with your purpose. It's not aligned with you getting the thing that you want. Nobody wants that. But losing yourself, the other side of that coin, the other side of that unhealthy coin, losing yourself into a relationship and being whatever the other person wants of you, or expecting that they make you either be aligned, or expecting that they make you, and it's not just happy. Like, the people around you should make you happy, but they don't make you, right? They're not going to give you purpose. They're not going to make you be happy at certain things, right? You have to know that yourself. You have to be you. That's your job, to be you, to know what you like and what you don't like, what you're bringing to the table. And I pretty much, the Zero to Hero course goes into like the shape of you, right? So we create like a shape throughout our lives, right? And the shape fits in certain situations. So when we've had undesirable situations, it shapes us to fit those undesirable situations again. So the entire Zero to Hero course is kind of about changing your shape. It's about understanding what shape you want to be, etc. But it's primarily about changing the shape of you so that you fit situations that you want to be and that you desire. So if you need space when things get rigid, because sometimes, somebody could be pushing on spaces of us, wanting us to bend in ways, and we get rigid sometimes when we're defensive. If you need space because you're rigid, and your shape doesn't fit the other person's shape, right? It's healthy if you go away and you decide that actually that bump in you that wasn't jiving with your partner, you actually want to change that. That's not really aligned with you, and you don't want to be like that. Then taking that space is really healthy for you to like soften, right? Because then you can come back and you're a little bit more pliable. And if you're fluid, if you're pliable, you can work through this stuff to meld your shapes. You don't need to take the space. But that's when you're rigid because it's a learning curve. You're rigid because somebody's poking you in a place that you didn't even know was sticking out. And that's healthy. That's part of the whole process here. But if this is a rigid space because this is who you are, right? Or this is who you choose to be, this is what aligns with your values, with the way that you feel, then there's nothing to do. If you're misaligned, okay, if your shape doesn't fit the other person's shape, space isn't going to change that. The only thing that's going to change that is choosing a different space to put yourself into. So I hope that kind of clarifies my perspective on whether or not relationships need space. And I hope you enjoyed it. And I will see you in the next episode where we talk about fighting with friends and loved ones. I'll see you then. G'day, y'all.